I've observed in the course of my life that you don't realise what you're learning when you're learning it. And there are layers and layers of experience that are added to you as you go through it. Mentoring and leadership, in my experience, are not things that can be taught, but they can be learned. And just over a decade ago, used to have the quote of the day on the front page. And one day, about 10 years ago, I was the quote of the day. And what I had said was, the problem is not that young people have not learned our values, it is that they have. John Howard, as my Prime Minister, didn't often call me, but he wanted to know what I meant. And I said to him, well, I was born in 1958. I was a member, I think, of the last generation of Australians that was born into a country where the architecture of our lives would be lived within essentially God, King and country. But over the course of much of my life, many of those things have changed. The diminishing of the importance of parenting as a full-time occupation. We went through a period from which we have now emerged, where volunteerism was derided by too many as being something that was done by do-gooders. We've also lived in a society through the course of my life where ethics-based organisations, churches and other religious-based organisations have been marginalised from public policy discourse. We've lived through a period where there has been diminishing respect for our institutions. And one of the other things that I think we have failed in is we have created a culture in which young people feel that if they don't get an outstanding result in Year 12, fashionable clothes, the technological material trappings of life, and a university education, they're of lesser value to their country and to their families than those who do. In the 14th year of my life, I was living in Launceston in northern Tasmania, and my father took me for a walk down the street in which we lived. And he said to me, son, have a look at the houses. Now, I'd seen them a million times before, you can imagine, but I'd had the facts of life 3 months earlier in a boat in the Tamar River where there was no escape, so you never knew what you were going to get. So my father said to me, son, your mother and I don't have any money, we don't know any people that have got influence. He said the only way you are ever going to live in a better house than the one in which you were growing up is if you work as hard as you can at school. About 6 months later they sold the house and they moved to Adelaide because they wanted to live in a city where there was a university, just in case one of their 3 kids might end up going to university. In those days Hobart was a much more expensive city. The following year my father lost his job, was unemployed for 2 years. He was in the naval business, he was a Marine Chief Steward. And I had a difficult year. And my mother was trying to console me about all this, and she said, son, in the end your life is going to be measured by the people and the causes to which it will ultimately be committed. I talked my parents into sending me back to a Catholic school once I saw my father had a job, and they did something that saved me in all kinds of ways. They sent me to a Jesuit college in Adelaide, and what saved me about it was 4 values that I was taught, which have informed everything that I've ever done since, every single day, everything that I do. I was told by the Jesuits, in case you don't know them, they're a kind of a above IQ militant subfaction of the Catholic priesthood. But I was told that a successful life should be built on 4 things. The first is commitment. You've got to consistently apply yourself to the things in which you believe. The second is that every single decision that you make has to be underwritten with a question. What is the right thing to do? Conscience. The third, compassion, to literally share another person's pain. But in a very practical sense, it means to be imbued with the capacity to see the world through the eyes of other people. If you think about it, almost all of life's suffering and pain comes about from people, perhaps even nations, making themselves the centre of their own lives. And I've often said to young people, knowing what someone thinks is important, but what's much more important is working out how they think. How does this person form his or her worldview? And the fourth thing is courage. Nothing of value is ever achieved in life without taking a risk, without having what was described to me, at least in those days, as having a brave heart. Not a reckless kind of courage, but one which is inspired by the belief that you are doing something that will make the lives of other human beings that much better. There are three things that have been found to build resilience into the lives of young people. The first is to have a stable, secure relationship with at least one adult, preferably, of course, a parent. But as we know here only too well, that is, for so many young Australians, not an option. The second is to be a part of a school community where you have a sense of identity, where other people know you. They know who you are. And the third is to live in a society which gives your life a sense of meaning and of purpose. And when you hear the statistics of which Martin reminded us earlier this morning, and particularly when you compare a decade ago, you were 60% more likely to die from a car crash if you were a young man than you were suicide, and now that is reversed entirely. Something has happened. We have diminished the toll which has been taken by disease and accident, yet we've had almost no impact on that which has been exacted by despair. In terms of our future and the things that we can all do to make a difference to the lives of other human beings, that a life of value is ultimately spent in the service of others. As St. Luke said in the parable of the Good Samaritan, take care of him, and whatsoever more thou spend, I shall repay thee. Maimonides, Aristotle, Christ, Muhammad, and Paul Harris, the founder of Rotary International, and so many others have observed. The best way to fulfil and serve yourself is in the service of other human beings. If I try to imagine what it is like to be 15 years old growing up in this country today, too many young Australians still tethered to the value system that my father was thought important, that our kids should expect to live in a better house, drive a better car, have a better job, earn more money. Many of these young kids, both boys and girls, they know in their own heart of hearts they're not likely to meet that, let alone exceed it. It's very tempting for them to think, well, I'll embrace values for the world I think I'm going to get. Mistrust, cynicism, detachment, impatience, materialism. Our challenge is to see that they embrace values for the world they want, to believe that the future is theirs to shape. They know that the way each of them lives affects the world. They can make conscious decisions to live in a way which changes the world. But in A Time in the River, Thomas Wolfe wrote, man's youth is a wonderful thing, so full of anguish and of magic, and yet he never comes to know it as it is. And to young people especially, I say, don't wake up at the age of 40 or 50 and wonder where the hell it all went. You can make a difference, and the most important differences that you can make are to the lives of those immediately around you, and through them your own community, and you can make a difference to the world. We live in a world, particularly at the moment when you open a newspaper or turn on a television, we live in a world of fundamentalist intolerance. We certainly live with enormous global economic uncertainty. We're living in vast ignorance of the consequences of decisions that we are making and are being made for us. But the thing that we need most is one another and the resource of our relationships. And that's why this is so important. So thank you very much.